Now we're going to learn about Mary Magdalene and Miriam. So we're going to learn that Yeshua had two love interests, not just one. I shall share with you now, according to the desire of your heart and mine, the nature of the developmental years wherein young Mary, later known as Mary Magdalene, the twin soul of Yeshua, was raised and prepared for her greater work. Hi, and welcome back to Empowered Spirit Healing. My name is Paula, and today we are continuing on with episode 10 of reading Anna, the grandmother of Jesus. In episode 9, we left off when little Yeshua, at only 8 years of age, went on a pilgrimage with his family, his mother and his father, to Mount Sinai, which is quite a powerful place where many people have had initiations there because it's a very powerful energy vortex. And this is also where Moses received the 10 commandments that are known in the Bible from God. So this is a very powerful place where there are lots of secret caves and crypts that have been used for the regeneration process. And there is a lot of ancient wisdom that has been hidden and kept there. So when little Yeshua went there, it was still being looked after by a group of Essenes who helped to keep all of the wisdom safe and hidden away from the general public. Then many centuries later, the monastery of St. Catherine of Alexandria was built, and it still stands there today. So today we are going to be continuing on Yeshua's homecoming after he has gone through his initiation of 4 days of having no food or water, and he had to practice certain things. And during this time, he learnt how to bilocate his consciousness and was able to go visit his parents while his physical body was on Mount Sinai, but his consciousness had bilocated, which is just absolutely incredible. And even though it can seem quite cruel to put a child through a situation like that, but we need to remember that back then, and only in certain groups, these kinds of things were practiced. And he wouldn't have just been thrown into this. He would have been learning and practicing. He would have been doing fasting and things like that as building up to be able to do this initiation. And it is as hard as it seems, but sometimes if we don't do these kinds of practices and disciplines and initiations, then we aren't going to excel or grow. It's the same with healing work, with any kind of work that you want to do on yourself. You have to actually do the work. You can't just say, oh, that sounds lovely, and just go meditate for 5 minutes and then expect your life to be profoundly different. You have to put in the daily discipline of certain practices to achieve the results that you want. And sometimes that can be easier said than done. Sometimes it's challenging, but with great hard work, we get a great reward. So today we're going to continue on with chapter 23, the homecoming. Let's get into it. Word had been sent ahead, and I awaited the return to Mount Carmel of Mary, Anna, Joseph, Yeshua, James, Jude, Joseph the younger, Rebecca, Simeon, and Miriam. Now, I get a little bit confused because there are so many Miriams and Marys in this one family and Essene community. So I get quite muddled up with which is which, but that's okay. We will continue reading on and we will figure it out as we go. Often I perched with the young children in the late afternoon on the hillside overlooking the road which snaked its way across the plain of Sharon below. This was the same road Joachim had travelled when he returned from India. Now I was looking as I had before, my heart aching to reach out and touch my beloved children who had long been away from me. We had heard in advance that Mary Anna was pregnant with her 5th child, and that Rebecca was ailing with a disease that afflicted her blood, bones, and skin. Some thought she had leprosy. However, we chose to diagnose her condition otherwise, and we agreed in advance that we would not have her put away from our community. How would Yeshua look now that he was in his 9th year? My new grandchildren, James, Jude, and Joseph the younger, what would they be like? And Miriam, so sweet a presence. How had the years in Egypt changed her? So many questions pressed upon my mind and heart that hot, blistering day in June of AD 5, as I took my turn with the very small children out upon the hillside. We had heard they were on their way. Could this be the day? It would be strange back then because, today we have mobile phones and we find out instantly how far off, like we can put it down to minutes and seconds, how far off somebody's going to be. But back then they literally would have had somebody send some kind of a note or letter, or somebody would have traveled ahead and said that they're coming back, and you just don't know when they're going to arrive. Life is so different these days. Absorbed in the picking of herbs and identifying their names and uses for the children, I was astonished to hear the large bell of Carmel begin to toll. Someone else had spotted the approaching caravan from a higher vantage point upon the mount where the sheep and goats grazed, and had run down to tell the good news. There were shouts amid the blowing of horns, and then the young boys and girls who could ride like wind quickly mounted the draft horses, mules, and donkeys. Off they went in a cloud of dust to meet these strangers whose story had been rehearsed over and over. Whom would they meet? Would their expectations be fulfilled? The processional journey had been slow and steady. The hot afternoon sun danced upon motes of dust. Shimmering haze blurred their upward ascent. The younger children who were with me tugged at my apron and skirts, pulling me after the mounted welcoming party. All the bells began to toll. Horns blew, cymbals and tambourine frame drums beat ecstatic rhythms. High and low voices sang out as the entire community of Carmel ran from the gates to the first round of the long, winding road. There most of us stood, waving our arms, garlanded with branches of olive, palm, and cedar. I could not hold back my tears any longer. Oh, I would be crying. I just cry at the drop of a hat. I wept and laughed and sang until all I could do was gather my hands to my breast and pray with an immense gratitude for the safe return of my beloved family. Through the thick yellow dust, the caravan approached the last turn, rutted by a recent cloudburst that had unexpectedly poured sweet rain upon our fields and gardens. Then I ran, children in hand. Mary Anna waved from her seat upon a large mule, her small body revealing the silhouette of one with child. At her side strode Joseph. Behind her, straddling the mule, was her youngest child, Joseph the younger, now almost 3 years old. Running ahead were 2 red-headed boys whom I instantly knew were James and Jude. Where was Yeshua? My eyes glanced from one beloved to the next. Then, through the haze, I saw the ox cart carrying Rebecca. Inside the cart was a young girl, cradling a still body in her lap. A bladder containing water hung by her side, and a tarpaulin stretched overhead, giving protection from the burning sun. Walking beside the ox was a tall, deeply tanned boy whose bright eyes and smiling teeth flashed as he caught my searching gaze. Riveted as if by a lightning bolt, I quaked with recognition. My God, it is Yeshua, a man in a boy's body. Yeshua called out to Jude to come and take the ox's tether and goad. Then, as fleet as a deer, Yeshua left the roadway and flew upwards, leaping from stone to stone. He was in my arms in less than a minute. Then, stepping back, we stood facing each other eye to eye. Although only 8, his strong arms curled around me as though he were a bear, lifting me off the ground. Laughing a contagious laugh, Yeshua spun me around and around, all the while looking into my eyes. He had the most extraordinary eyes I had ever seen. You are just like my mother, only you are still yourself. Shall I call you Nana, my little mother? Come and see my beautiful mother, whispered Yeshua in my ear as he gently set me on the ground. Taking my hand, he led me excitedly to Mary Anna. Joseph stopped the mule and helped his beloved wife to dismount. Once her sore, strained legs could hold her upright, Mary Anna was in my arms. How wondrous our reunion! Oh. Arm in arm with Mary Anna in the middle, Yeshua and I walked along among the pilgrims, hugging and kissing each other as we went. When I came upon Rebecca, who was with Miriam in the ox cart, my heart burst with agony for her affliction. Open sores covered her face, causing one eye to be swollen shut. Oh, that's so sad. I reached into the lumbering cart to place my hand upon her gaunt form, and placing my ear close, heard her faint words. Mother, I have come home to you. I know you can make me well. For this I have prayed. These were the barely audible words Rebecca spoke from a place of faith in her heart. It was indeed hard to look upon Rebecca's beauty wasting away, her face ashen, and her eyes glazed by pain. Then I looked up into my granddaughter Miriam's doe-like golden eyes. Such wise and noble beauty I had not seen among all the maidens born of the light, except the one you call Mary Magdalene, the daughter of Mary of Magdala, and Joseph of Arimathea. So there we go. So the one that's known as Mary Magdalene is the daughter of Mary of Magdala and Joseph of Arimathea, which is Anna's son. And then Mary of Magdala is his wife. Slowly we made our way to the south gate of the Carmel compound. Nathanael, the shepherd boy, who had held the infant Yeshua in his arms, then came forward and offered to assist. He was now 16 years old and had recently completed his probationary initiations in the Mount Carmel Mystery School. Nathanael gently lifted Rebecca from the ox cart and carried her into the infirmary, accompanied by a weary Simeon and a solemn Miriam. I introduced him to everyone and then explained to Yeshua who Nathanael was and that the little lamb he had given Yeshua at his birth was still very much alive. We agreed that we would later find the little lamb that had become a grandmother sheep many times over. Oh, how lovely. I'm glad the little lamb wasn't sacrificed. One by one, the tired pilgrims dismounted from carts and steeds. Children milled about, asking questions, getting acquainted with cousins, and making friends with those about whom they had only heard stories. Yeshua was pressed to answer dozens of questions all at the same time. The children hung on him, begging him to lift them up and whirl them around, as they had seen him do with me. When the weariness of the journey caught up with him, Yeshua gently excused himself and went with his father and Simeon to the men's dormitory and bath. This homecoming was bittersweet. On the one hand, here were my beloved children returned to me. On the other, Rebecca's sore condition deeply troubled my heart. Reluctantly, though in good faith, I will now share with you the sad departing of Rebecca. Though her faith was strong, her condition continued to worsen over the 6 months after her arrival in Carmel. I stayed with her in the infirmary day and night, as did the others of my family. We did all that we could to heal her fading body. Her spirit waxed strong, and her inner beauty grew as we took turns caring for Rebecca's basic needs. Although her voice was silenced to our outer ears, we could hear and feel her love of God and the angels who attended her. When it came time for her soul to lift upward into the light, we all gathered around. I could feel Joachim's presence and gave thanks that all our children had been spared until now. This beautiful being freely moved on into the greater realms of light in order to fulfill her part from on the other side of the veil. Miriam, Rebecca's only child, was bereft beyond comforting for almost a fortnight. Oh, I can only imagine. Until one evening when Yeshua came to her where she knelt beside her mother's grave. Gently he picked her up and held her close to his heart. Where she had grown numb of spirit, he blew his breath until Miriam began to shake. At last the venom of bitter anger towards God and towards me for not saving her mother began to depart. Because her father Simeon had gone with Joseph to Qumran for a week after her mother's death, Miriam felt utterly alone, desolated, and betrayed. Oh. Yeshua continued to blow his breath into her heart until her sobbing began to subside. Holding his cousin fast to his bosom, he waited until another wave of grief and anger crested. Before resuming breathing into her heart, torn by sobs and screams, she beat her fists on his back. Why, oh God, why did God take my beloved mother? She lamented. All Yeshua knew to do was to hold her until the months of futile hope and deep anguish that had frozen into vacant-eyed numbness were dissolved. Then Yeshua led her to his mother. Mary Anna took Miriam to her bosom and adopted her as her own child. So it was that Miriam became Yeshua's sister, remembering the promise that she had made to him long ago in Egypt. She then proceeded to devote herself to fulfilling her vow that she would be his eternal friend and confidant. Oh, that's quite an emotional chapter. So now we are up to chapter 24, Yeshua's childhood. My beloved friend, there is much more that I desire to share with you regarding those 5 formative years between AD 5 and 10. Yeshua returned to the homeland of the Hebrew peoples to receive the counsel of Essene elders and the imprinting of his ancient soil where the prophets had once walked. In him would be fulfilled all that the prophets had spoken. During the latter part of the year of their return to Mount Carmel, Joseph ben Jacob began establishing himself as a builder and fine craftsmen in the new village of Nazareth, named after the Nazarite Essenes, an easy day's journey from Mount Carmel. Nazareth was located 5 miles south of Sepphoris and 10 miles south of Cana, where Joseph's parents lived. Mary Anna's brother Nathan had acquired land in Nazareth and proposed that Joseph use it to build a home that would support his growing family. So it was that Joseph and Mary Anna moved to a modest but more spacious home in the early spring of AD 6. From Nazareth, Joseph took his trade to the nearby bustling Roman town of Sepphoris, where Yeshua often accompanied him as his apprentice. Occasionally, Joseph also facilitated the design and building of Essene communal structures throughout Galilee and in the desert near the Salt Sea. Whenever Joseph could, he also brought Yeshua to Mount Carmel and to Qumran, where he would stay for months at a time, taking probationary initiations. Of these I will say more later. You have in your tradition that Joseph was a carpenter. But I will add that he was much more than a simple itinerant handyman. Indeed, he designed and built buildings for public and private use. He was also known as a master craftsman of fine woods, musical instruments, and the tabernacles of synagogues. And to the initiated, Joseph was known as the one who knew the crafting of the soul. He was an adept who held within his countenance the substance, frequencies, and mathematical codes of the Ark of the Covenant. Wow, that is so fascinating. Just imagine having something that was crafted and made by him and just infused with his knowledge and the frequencies, and it would have been created with special mathematical codes. How incredible. Joseph was looked upon as one to whom initiates came to receive certain rites of passage into the way of the teacher of righteousness. So I find this really interesting that, this is when Yeshua was a very, very little boy, and people are coming to him, coming to Joseph, his father, to learn about the way of the teacher of righteousness. And so many people that are a part of the Essene communities were sharing this knowledge with others way before Jesus did. So it's interesting that it's all Jesus's teachings, but is it really? Is it really Jesus's teachings? Or is it really this Christ consciousness that has come from way before Jesus was even thought of? And there's been a certain group of people that knew of this Christ consciousness, and they have been chosen to learn, to pass it down, to protect the knowledge, and to share it at the right time. And just jumping a little bit ahead, but I wonder if this is completely my own opinion, but what if this Christ consciousness knowledge actually comes from Atlantis? I don't know yet, but I'm interested to find out. During the extended months that Yeshua lived in Carmel, he spent a great deal of his time with me. In Carmel and also at Qumran, he took many of the initiations. He lived with the older boys and celibate men in a communal dormitory. His dress, possessions, and daily routine were simple, straightforward, and communally uniform. To look at Yeshua as he went about his labors with the other boys, one would not perceive him being treated any differently than the others with whom he shared his life. Yeshua spent long hours in the library reading, translating, and transcribing the ancient texts which had come out of Alexandria, Greece, Persia, India, and the Himalayas. He was quick to learn the different languages, and he enjoyed communicating with anyone who would enter into various philosophical perspectives and dialogues with him. Long before the sun rose, he could be found walking amidst the fields of grasses, alone or with his mother when she visited, sitting in meditation beneath the ancient cedars or absorbed in the text of some ancient scrolls or papyrus. Like his father, Joseph, he slept little. He took his turn at the various communal chores without complaint. Whether it was the cleaning of floors, latrines, and the kitchen, or the tending of children, blocks, or the lame, Yeshua went from one task to the other with great sensitivity, gentleness, and a light heart. He had begun to gain a mastery of the emotional storms that still swept through him. In many ways, Yeshua was the perfect child. But before you put him on a pedestal, I will also tell that on occasion he played jokes on the other children, adults, and me. There was one time when Yeshua was attentively rubbing my feet on one of our long walks to gather herbs. Unbeknownst to me, he tied my sandal laces together when he placed my sandals back on my feet. When I got up to continue our walk, I lost my balance, falling into Yeshua's waiting arms. Oh, he sounds like he's cheeky, but in a very sweet, loving way. Then we both merrily laughed as he whirled me around. Whirling me around seemed to be one of his favorite pastimes, when he thought I wouldn't mind or when he thought I was being too serious. Oh, what a beautiful relationship. It's special because I had a really special relationship with my gran, and it's just so lovely to hear that he had this with his gran. Yeshua also had challenging days when he surprised everyone with complaints and stubbornness. And when an unpredictable emotional storm came on such a day, our community found it best to leave Yeshua alone. Well, you know what? He's only human. And even the nicest, sweetest, kindest of us can have our moments. And when I have one of my moments, I like to just be left alone too. Occasionally, during particularly challenging inner storms, Yeshua would seek me out and we would go for walks or go into our favorite cave where I kept the space for him to work it out. Then we talked and shared deeply from our hearts until peace and love were found again. During the times our community gathered for feasting and celebration before and after certain high days, Yeshua loved to teach the other children various games that he had invented or expanded upon. Some of the games tested physical prowess, some honed mental acuity, and some were just for laughter and play. In one such game, my grandson ran like the wind ahead of the other children, only to dodge to the right or left, falling behind a child who was lame. Then, in an instant, the unsuspecting child would be picked up and perched on Yeshua's thin shoulders. Off they romped, laughing giddily, and the child flapping his or her arms like a bird. While Yeshua was in Egypt, he had acquired something of the rich heritage of Egyptian, Hebrew, and Persian temple music and folk dances, which he learned from his aunt Miriam and his uncle Ezekiel. By his 12th year, he had become an accomplished singer, composer, and musician. Wow, I didn't realize that. There's so many details that you forget. He loved singing the psalms of Akhenaten, David, and Zarathustra. He rejoiced in the dialogue of Krishna and Arjuna. He was given ample opportunity to share his unusually advanced understanding, as well as his sweet, perfectly pitched soprano voice, when we met for morning and evening prayers, the Sabbath, weddings, and other festive celebrations. Yeshua took his second rite of passage into manhood when he was 12 at the hand of his father within the new synagogue at Nazareth, that Joseph had assisted in erecting. He amazed the elders with his knowledge and wisdom of the Torah and other ancient texts of Enoch, Zadok, and Moses. However, it would be another 12 years before he appeared before the priests of Levi in Jerusalem for his right into true manhood, as his tradition was practiced by the Jews in that day. Also, during Yeshua's 12th year, he entered more deeply into the serious matters of the mystery school. Among other teachings, I assisted him to understand how to hold and circulate the breath of life within his body until his heartbeat slowed to an almost imperceptible flutter. Into the caves upon the mount we would go together to test his knowledge, to test his understanding of pranic flow and how to move through the veils of the astral worlds. Some of these caves were hollowed out in a fashion to create specific acoustical sounds. Deep trance states could be accomplished with these sounds, were consciously made and heard. I would use my voice accompanied with my frame drum, Hathor sistrum, and bronze bells. How cool. Yeshua brought jugs of water, pallets, oil lamps, and the herbs that would sustain our vigils. Sometimes we stayed deep within the caves for as long as a week. Wow. I came to know Yeshua very well as we shared deeply during these retreats. Oh, I would love to experience something like that. Just being away from everything else and just being a part of nature and experiencing these different healing frequencies and sounds. And it would be, just imagine how much we would learn about ourselves if we had the time to do these things. I mean, of course, society is designed this way so that we don't have time to do things like that. And we're so busy, busy, busy all the time. But it would be really cool if, in the future, as the world continues to awaken and we start to have more time for things like this, and just imagine how we could explore our inner minds and how much we could grow and learn if we had the time to just tap into this. I suppose if it's a priority, we just have to create the time, don't we? Together, we would take etheric journeys into the inner retreats of the masters. One of our favorite bilocation journeys was to visit a number of places in Britain. So I just want to interrupt for a second. I'm wondering if bilocation is quite the same as astral traveling, because that's what it seems like to me. It seems like it's what we call today astral traveling. I promised him he would someday physically travel to that ancient Celtic land and take initiation at the hand of his uncle Joseph of Arimathea. His uncle and his parents had already agreed that Yeshua would be taken to Britain for 3 years at the age of 13. As Yeshua approached his 13th birthday, he undertook his first level initiation into the rite of the sepulchre. All our work prior to this initiation into the mysteries had prepared him to go into the death state and to return his soul to his body through the process of resurrection. So it was that I took Yeshua into the secret chamber located behind a false door in which I had placed my body from time to time, when it had been appropriate for me to depart the earth plane for an extended period of time. As the long hours passed, I looked into the future and saw all the arduous tests Yeshua would be put through. And there was a part of me that wished Yeshua could simply live as a man, albeit a man who could love and serve much. So it was that initiating my grandson was also an initiation for me. In this way, at the tender age of 12, Yeshua began his preparation for publicly demonstrating the crucifixion and resurrection initiations. Wow, so he started preparing for the crucifixion at age 12. I guess that makes sense because it would, there'd be a lot of work that goes into it. Throughout the remainder of his earthly expression, Yeshua knew death to be an illusion. And with each resurrection experience that followed through the years, he brought more light into the elements of his physical body. So there is a guy called Freddie Silver, and he has done quite a lot of research into the resurrection mysteries, and he's even written a book specifically about it, as well as many other books. And I haven't actually read that book yet, but it's on my list of books to read because it sounds absolutely fascinating. But I've heard some of his talks that he does. And yeah, it'd be really interesting to see because he talks about how the pyramids and things like that were actually used for these resurrection initiations to take place. Because basically you go through the initiation and the process as if you are actually dying, but you don't actually die. And it helps to remove the fear of death, and it helps you to, lose the illusion, just like Anna said about Jesus, that he lost the illusion of death, because it is really an illusion that we're here and that we, live and die and experience all the things that we experience, because even though it feels really, really real, which it needs to, because otherwise it wouldn't kind of defeat the purpose of the whole game. But on a soul level, we are infinite and we are, living forever. We are coming back and doing this again and again and learning and growing. And it's through these special initiations that many people practiced that they would gain a lot of knowledge and overcome this fear of death. But in order to do that, you basically, it almost feels like you're dying. And I believe that, people are put into different caves or things. They're in the complete darkness. It's often for 3 days, because that's where the whole 3 days comes from, that Jesus died on the cross and then he was put in a tomb for 3 days. So that is part of the initiation process. And these resurrection initiations were happening way before Jesus was even thought of. So if you are interested in learning more about that, I highly suggest you check out Freddie Silver. He is a really cool guy. I've seen quite a few interviews on him and he's very, very fascinating. I couldn't find a YouTube channel of his to share below, but I will share his name and you can just type him into YouTube search and you will see a whole heap of interviews come up that he's done with various different people. So yeah, very interesting information. Also, at this time, signs of pubescence began to become apparent. Oh, the fun awkwardness. His lanky form continued to lengthen. His hands and feet had outgrown the rest of his body. Yeshua's body was unusually strong for one so slender and tall. He allowed his silken dark auburn hair to grow long in the manner of the celibate Essene initiate. He was over a hand's length taller than his mother and me. I shall always treasure in my heart the memory of Yeshua's infectious laughter, as well as his stony stubbornness when it was time to put his determination, courage, and wisdom to the test. I was privy to his childlike spontaneity, curiosity, and playfulness. Occasionally, his mastery of the full range of emotion which he had developed over the years of his childhood seemed to evaporate. There were times when the least annoying disturbance would incite a flood of tears. Sometimes he would bend over and guttural screams poured out unexpectedly. Then Yeshua would sit down shaking while he attempted to embrace and transmute the energy he had been taught to do by his mother and father when he was a child. There were even times when the elementals outpictured his inner storms. Dark clouds appeared out of nowhere as a torrent of rage or grief moved through his body. Lightning struck the crags and cedars as deafening thunderclaps rumbled down the mount into the valleys below. Rain poured down, filling the almost empty cisterns with welcomed drinking water. I mean, wow, what an effect to have an effect on the weather. But I can kind of understand where he's coming from. I mean, if he's obviously, oh, Millie's come to say hello. But he's clearly a very empathetic person. So he is taking on the emotions of the entire world. So it's understandable that, all this build up would just be building up and building up in his body and in his mind and in his auric field. And it has to come out at some point somehow. So I guess that's just the way it would come out. And it affected the weather. At least they got rain, at least they got drinking water. I could feel Yeshua's potent life force energy surging in his developing groin, whereas he had once been carefree in his open expression of delight with the embraced warmth of the maternal bodies of his mother, grandmothers, aunts, and the curious femaleness of his cousins. Yeshua now seemed to withdraw into a reserved shyness. Often he would go into the bathhouse for ritual washing in order to gain clarity for his mind and body. He often took extra turns with the sheep in the fields away from the others so that he could have sufficient space to sort out his feelings. This was complicated by the various contradictions within the scriptures he had read. The ambiguity of what others said and practiced, and the reality of the sexual life force energy running rampant in his own body. During such times, and as he gained increasing mastery, Yeshua turned to his mother less and less. This was a difficult time for Mary Anna, though it was a necessary preparation for freeing her son to fulfill all that he had come to do. And I think it's also pretty normal at the teenage stage. All teenagers just go through that little period of time, sometimes a year or two, where they just don't really want to know their parents, and it's just fun. Once a poisonous snake bit Yeshua while he was removing it from the Carmel compound. Stunned with disbelief, he screamed while squeezing the serpent until it died in his hands and became like a staff. Then he stood rigid, not allowing anyone to come near him, while standing absolutely still with his eyes closed for almost an hour. Yeshua summoned the venom to be transmuted by the life force energies that streamed through his body. Wow, that's really incredible. Over the years, we all came to know my grandson's unusual powers. Although the other boys tried to include him in their camaraderie, Yeshua found himself more and more alone. Just as nature and prayerful communion provided his mother with comfort and solace, so it was with her eldest son. Yeshua was gifted with prodigious insights into the mysteries. Sometimes he would meet an energy field of consciousness about which he would ask me for further explanation, or for guidance as to where he might go within the scriptures and codices for greater illumination. Always I would encourage him to turn inward for answers within his own heart. We often had discussions of the various points of view of the different religious sects, doctrines, and practices. So it was that I taught and prepared my beloved grandson for his coming initiations, which would eventually assist him to rise from the sepulchre when the time of fulfillment of prophecy was at hand. His life would demonstrate to humanity that death holds no power for those who know that death is an illusion. Now we're going to learn about Mary Magdalene and Miriam. So we're going to learn that Yeshua had two love interests, not just one. So chapter 25, Mary Magdalene and Miriam's childhood. I shall share with you now, according to the desire of your heart and mine, the nature of the developmental years wherein young Mary, later known as Mary Magdalene, the twin soul of Yeshua, was raised and prepared for her greater work. While her father, Joseph of Arimathea, which is Anna's son, so I guess they're like second cousins or something, continued to live and work in Jerusalem. Young Mary grew up with her mother, Mary of Magdala, and her aunt Martha at their spacious country home in Bethany. She rejoiced in the beauty of its open and sunny inner courtyard and the light which filtered into the surrounding rooms. Martha had never married, so it was a great blessing when her older brother Joseph and his first wife Eunice Salome created their second home in Bethany and asked Martha to caretake it. Joseph had then spared no expense in expanding Martha's abode when his new wife, Mary of Magdala, came to live with her about 14 years after Eunice Salome had died. Martha carefully prepared it as a sanctuary of light and cultured beauty. Throughout her lovely home were collections of art from Greece, Egypt, and other places near and far. It was in this environment that our young Mary, as we called her, developed her sensitivity to growing things and to the people who sought out her aunt and mother for advice or remedies. Young Mary loved her mother with a possessive love that was almost ferocious, much like a lioness protecting her young. When she was small, she would watch her mother and aunt like a hawk, and then pretend she had the same healing skills they had, as she treated her dolls, the small household animals, fowl and lame birds. Oh, that's so cute. It soon became evident when the injured animals revived that this child had a gift for healing. Young Mary loved to walk out into the desert with her mother at sunrise and sunset. There she befriended many wildlife animals and made them her pets. Some of these pets were lizards, snakes, rodents, birds, wild dogs, and cats. The aging and ailing Martha did not particularly like her niece's menagerie and insisted that the animals be kept in the stable away from the main household. However, young Mary could sometimes be found secretly nursing one of her pets in the closet of her room, or a box containing a family of newly born kittens might be found by Martha during her cleaning. The last straw came when Martha opened one of her storage baskets and found a poisonous snake coiled inside. From then on, young Mary could not bring home snakes. Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with that. I mean, a wild dog or a cat, that's cute, but a snake, a rodent, I don't know. Mary of Magdala travelled to her home village of Magdala every solstice and equinox to officiate as high priestesses at the temple grotto of the goddess, the divine feminine aspect of the Godhead. On these occasions, her daughter always went with her, so it was that at a very early age, young Mary learned of the Great Mother, her rituals, ceremonies, songs, rhythms, and cycles. As a small girl, she could be sitting in stillness, staring with her golden eyes, holding a focus for hours on end. Sometimes a milky vapor appeared before her or wrapped around her. In this mist, those with eyes to see could behold angels or beings from other dimensions and worlds. Wow, so she is a highly developed soul. At times, food, coins, jewelry, statuettes, or sweet perfumed oils would precipitate in front of my granddaughter or in her hands. Wow, so she's just got next level manifestation skills. She would blink, smile intensely, laugh, and then share the treasure with all. She kept little for herself, loving to give the fruits of these magical moments to those who were her family and household keepers. As she grew older, and other initiate maidens compared themselves unfavorably with her, young Mary refrained from publicly sharing her magical gifts. She avoided as much as possible the shunning and cutting remarks of her peers' jealousies. Often her pillow was wet with tears because she felt lonely and misunderstood. In looking to her mother and her invisible friends for comfort, she found purpose and direction for her life. I find it really interesting that Mother Mary, Yeshua, and Mary Magdalene all really struggled with this. They all had such amazing, incredible gifts, but those gifts made them different and really made them not fit in with other people and feel different and feel like they needed to have a lot of alone time. And even though it's kind of really sad that they experienced that, but I feel like it's also kind of a blessing because when I've often felt different in my life and felt like I'm weird or just don't fit in with the normal everyday mainstream kind of people. And in a way, it's kind of a blessing because I do have a lot of compassion for other people because I've never just fitted in with the normal, typical people. And so I tend to have a lot more compassion for other people. And I think that this was all chosen on purpose for them. They needed to be different and feel different so that they could have more compassion for others and in the work that they do. And also it helps them to bond and really understand each other better. I think when you meet other people that are just like-minded and aligned with you and have also struggled with fitting in, you just get each other, and it's such an amazing, special experience. And if everybody was the same, it just wouldn't be so special. So I feel like even though it's sad, it's kind of a blessing at the same time. Adding to young Mary's challenges were the averted glances and hostile remarks of the Orthodox, Pharisees, and the aristocratic Sadducees when she and her mother would go into the marketplace or visit other cousins in the villages between Bethany and Magdala. When they were home in Bethany, they seldom went out into the streets and rarely ventured into the throngs of Jerusalem. The reason for secreting themselves away and traveling incognito was that the Jewish patriarchal priests and their wives had become increasingly antagonistic towards the worship of the Divine Mother or Holy Shekinah. By placing themselves as intermediaries between the seeker and God, the priesthood sought control over people's ability to have direct knowing of God within. The Shekinah's way of direct revelation they distrusted and often abhorred. They despised Isis, Inanna, and other representations of the Great Mother because they could not make use of the goddess for their own purposes. The women who were strong in the old matriarchal traditions were perceived as threatening because they could not be easily controlled and also because they held powers that the priesthood coveted for itself. Therefore, many of the men in positions of religious authority looked down upon women, generally as temptresses responsible for the fall of humankind and the corruption of flesh. Most husbands kept their wives and daughters as ignorant possessions and virtual slaves to their physical pleasures and their need for heirs. Those women who were known for the worship of the goddess were often branded whores and harlots, which really sadly explains why Mary Magdalene was known as a whore. And it's just disgusting. I mean, the woman that she becomes, but who she came from, her family, her grandmother, it's just such an insult to them. The state of affairs was further complicated by the fact that Joseph of Arimathea held the position of adjunctive counselor to the Sanhedrin, the legislative and judicial governing body over the peoples who practiced the so-called law of Moses. So it was that this delicate situation required a certain amount of secrecy concerning Joseph's relationship with his wife, who was a high initiate and priestess of the goddess. Thus, Mary of Magdala and her daughter retired to a rather obscure life within their own home. In this climate of distrust, young Mary grew wary of men, especially those in positions of authority. Her sensitive nature questioned such a dogmatic and hypocritical system that had such an impact on the relationship between her father and mother. Although she was repelled by these conditions, she was attracted to those men who, like her father, were kind and wise and who could appreciate her beyond her outer beauty and femaleness. It seemed to her that her father was never home enough. She thrived when he was near and would become withdrawn and sullen, not eating for a day or two whenever Joseph of Arimathea left for Jerusalem or went on long journeys to places she longed to visit. When her beloved father was home, he would take young Mary on his knee and tell her stories of his adventures and share gifts with his travels. These gifts were beautiful, to be sure, yet not as precious as were Joseph's loving arms and kind, thickly bearded face. Young Mary loved the smell of her father's manliness, and she made her desire for his attention well understood by the entire household. Young Mary only encountered her mother's grown children, Thomas, Matthew, and Susanna, when our mother visited them in Capernaum and Magdala. By the time young Mary was 7 years of age, however, there were 2 younger siblings with whom she had to learn to share her parents' attention. There were now Lazarus, who was 5 years younger, and young Martha, who was just a babe, 6.5 years younger. As Lazarus grew older, there continued to be a close rapport. With Martha, however, there seemed to be an old karmic pattern of distrust and competition that was only resolved years later. That's very interesting. When she was in her 9th year, young Mary heard the exciting news that her cousin Yeshua had returned from Egypt and that her parents were planning a special journey to visit her grandmother at Mount Carmel and to meet relatives she had only heard about. What would Yeshua, James, Jude, Joseph, Ruth, and Miriam all be like? It was with great enthusiasm that young Mary packed her things and set off with her parents and younger siblings for Mount Carmel to meet her aunt Mary Anna, her uncle Joseph, and her cousins. As it turned out, the experience of meeting Yeshua and Miriam was far beyond anything that young Mary could possibly have imagined. When Yeshua and young Mary looked into each other's eyes, they instantly recognized one another. As a piercing light moved through their hearts, both of them felt as if they had been struck by lightning. When Miriam and young Mary beheld one another, there was a similar experience of soul recognition. In their case, however, the quickening of divine light was accompanied by a dark shadow. Because they both loved Yeshua, there began to be an awkward rivalry between them as they both attempted to claim Yeshua's full attention. This thorn of contention between Miriam and young Mary grew over the years as they came into their maidenhood. It was this thorn that became the great test of divine love, which moved both of them through their probationary initiations. So it was that Yeshua grappled with the intense feelings that arose within his heart and was torn at a young age between these two great loves in his life. He knew that his destiny was entwined with both, but how? During the next 4 years, young Mary came to Carmel with her mother on several different occasions. And although Yeshua was thrilled to see his cousin, he also felt relieved when it was time for her to return home to Bethany. He often encountered her in his dreams, and even though he missed young Mary, he was glad to have only Miriam present at Mount Carmel while he focused his energies on the many tasks that required his attention. As for young Mary, that first meeting with Yeshua at the age of 8 constituted the pivotal point of her life. And from that point onward, she began to know ever more fully who she was and for what purpose she had incarnated upon this earth. So it was that when young Mary became 13, she was brought to Mount Carmel by her parents during the time of Yeshua's final preparations to leave for Britain with Joseph of Arimathea. Her mother had already begun to initiate her into the mysteries of the Order of the Magdalene at the Great Mother's Grotto at Magdala. However, she had never been required to commit to any consistent discipline. So it was with high hopes and expectations that I began my work with the one you call Mary Magdalene. It was not easy for young Mary to leave the comforts of her Bethany home and the luxury of having very little requirement for attending to the affairs of homemaking. Such domestic concerns were well attended to by her Aunt Martha and her maids. So it was something of a rude shock when the pampered young lady attempted to adjust to the communal requirements of sharing everything, living in rather austere conditions and surrendering her freedom to do as she pleased with the strict codes of monastic conduct, ritual, and routine. Furthermore, having learned to distrust the dogmatic, authoritarian, patriarchal orientation of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, she found herself beginning to rebel against the discipline of our tradition-bound Essene community. Yeah, it would be pretty challenging if you were used to a pretty luxurious life and then all of a sudden you've just got to be following really strict rules. For most of the first year, she balked and was petulant, attempting to win favors and special treatment through her charismatic manipulations, which had worked so well back in Bethany. So it was that young Mary could be seen pouting, teasing the other young girls and boys, running away, and sometimes standing in resolute defiance against the rules that had governed and maintained the Mount Carmel community for centuries. It's so funny to hear that Mary Magdalene and Yeshua had these little cheeky sides to them when they were children. They never before had been such a one to question Mount Carmel's entrenched authority, which disturbed the peace among the young and old alike. To have this rebellious adolescence in our midst was like having a wolverine that felt cornered or a hornet bearing its stinger. Her mother could not persuade young Mary to bend to the standard expected of those who sought initiation at Mount Carmel. We all wondered if she would make it through her first year. After her mother and younger siblings returned to Bethany, young Mary went through a difficult period for a number of months. She went on hunger strikes and refused to eat. She would hiss and spit like a wild animal when invited to remember neglected assignments. We did not know what to do to help her feel at home at Mount Carmel. Mary Anna came to see if she could help, but even her attempts to comfort her niece were refused. So great was young Mary's influence upon us that it was though a dark cloud hung over our community, no matter how hard we tried to place our attention to the common goals which ordinarily brought us great peace. So the months passed into the winter season. Cold winds, sleet, hail, and frost bit deeply into our reserve of patience. More and more of the community turned away from her, ignoring her, refusing to give in to young Mary's rebellious manipulations, sullen depressions, and defiant withdrawal into herself. Wow, so she was quite a challenging young lady. Whenever I went to my beloved granddaughter, my heart anguishing for her well-being, she would avert her eyes, looking down, tears welling up. She would run past me as if she were freeing herself from a captor. Once, when I found her crying in a dark storeroom, I took her into my arms only to have her begin screaming, tearing my robe and apron, her eyes maddened with grief and heartache. It's your fault that I'm here. I don't want to be here. I hate you. I'll never forgive you for taking me away from my mother and father, she screamed. As I let her go, I felt confused and tortured by the demons of self-doubt, remorse, and guilt. I too began to question the traditional methods of teaching the ancient mysteries and wondered if young Mary was right in demanding reforms. I did not know what to do. So I gave our young rebel up to the Lord Most High and asked Archangel Gabriel to help me find a way to heal her heart. I also began to look at Mount Carmel through young Mary's eyes. Among Carmel's elders, it was decided that young Mary would be escorted back to her home in Bethany. On the evening of that choice, she became very ill with a disease that affected her heart and lungs. High fever, chills, and deep coughing racked her thin body. Miriam, who also had her pallet in the young maiden's dormitory, came to me with the news of her cousin's worsening condition. I gathered several other women who were skilled at healing to come with me. We took young Mary to the infirmary. Although Miriam had endured young Mary's stinging barbs and had continually compared herself unfavorably with her cousin, she now began to feel a love for her cousin that she had not felt before. Miriam also began to realize that she and only she understood young Mary, from whom anyone else had become alienated. She understood her longing for her parents, her moodiness, and her rebellion against Mount Carmel's strict discipline and piety. In short, she understood why her cousin had become aloof, withdrawn, and numb. Miriam understood her cousin to be like herself. Miriam understood her cousin to be more like herself than anyone else that she knew. The essential difference between them was that young Mary did not hesitate when there was an opportunity to be an active reformer of the outer world, while Miriam preferred to invisibly harmonize discord on the inner planes. So Miriam came along that night to be with her cousin, whose silence spoke louder than words, and she was determined to leave Carmel one way or another. When we told young Mary of the elder's decision to let her return to Bethany, her face brightened. However, the many weeks of starving herself had taken its toll. The fever intensified, her spittle carried blood. Miriam responded with a courageous resolve to support her cousin with every ounce of strength she had. She brought her pallet and laid herself down beside young Mary. Placing her blanket over both of them, Miriam wrapped her arms around her cousin's frail body that in turn sweated profusely and convulsed with chills. Through it all, they both somehow found deep healing. From time to time, I relieved Miriam so that she could attend to her bodily needs and ritual washing. As Miriam nursed her, young Mary found a loyal friend with whom she could open her aching heart. And so it was that these two began to truly know each other. They found solace by bringing healing balm to one another's broken hearts. However, there continued to be a barb of jealousy over their mutual love of Yeshua and their suppressed fantasy that he would someday choose one over the other in marriage. Although this thorn continued to test them through the remainder of their early years, they opened their hearts to each other as only soulmates can, once they see through the veil of distrust. A messenger had been sent to Bethany to summon Mary of Magdala to come and be with her ailing daughter, assess the situation, and perhaps take her back to Bethany. During the days while we waited for her mother, young Mary began to change before our very eyes. Although she was weak, she had begun to welcome the rich herbal broth and the gentle caresses I gave her. At last, a glittering light gathered in young Mary's golden eyes as Miriam recited secret love poems she had written. She enjoyed brushing her cousin's long mahogany hair, which, like her own raven black hair, was very densely curled. With new ears, Miriam listened as no one had before to this one's childhood stories of loneliness and of great love for her mother and father. Of all her stories, the romantic fantasies and troubled dreams that young Mary had of Yeshua were the words Miriam listened to with every beat of her heart. She discovered that her cousin's trials and dreams were just like her own. So these two bonded and healed as they emptied their hearts out to each other. Mary of Magdala arrived to find in her daughter a matured young novice who had passed a most arduous test. Including young Mary in the decision-making, the elders of Mount Carmel now agreed that she could stay as a probationary initiate until she was 16. Then she, Miriam, and other young probationary initiates would go to Egypt to receive further initiations if they proved successful with those they would take at Carmel. So it was the next 2 years passed harmoniously as young Mary and Miriam grew in stature and waxed strong within the great mystery. Both of these young women developed a growing sensitivity to the ways of spirit. They searched deep within themselves and found a profound, abiding love for the one God, Goddess. They knew their purpose was to restore life to that which was dead within the minds, bodies, souls, and outer institutions of humankind. Claiming the prize of self-mastery was the pearl of great price they both sought. Thus embracing, balancing, and unifying the polarities within themselves became the goal of these two young women who found in each other a perfect mirror. They also knew that their lives were integrally entwined with their cousin Yeshua. He became their constant guiding star and the mystery they most desired to unveil. So it was that I have shared with you some understanding about the personalities of these two young maidens. In future years, young Mary would become Yeshua's beloved consort. Miriam, his adopted sister, whom he called Mary Grace, continued to be his loyal friend and confidant. So that was a really fun chapter, learning all about that. And it's interesting that as Mary Magdalene had a little moment, had her dark night of the soul experience, and then it ended up bringing her really close to her cousin. So that was really cool. In the next episode, we are going to continue on with chapter 26, which is all about Yeshua's journey to Britain. So that is going to be very exciting. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have, please like, subscribe, please share with anybody that might be interested in listening to this story. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining me. Bye.